Okay, welcome to the 56th episode of an Evolving Man podcast. So today I am just introducing Hugh Newton, and he's talking about his book, The Sovereign's Journey. Now, the reason I'm recording this intro is just to tell you a little bit about the interview, but also to let you know that the first 20 minutes or so, his video freezes, but the audio keeps going. So the reason I didn't stop it is because it was just so valuable, the information. So I thought I would not interrupt him. He talks about the archetypes. He talks about the difference between the hero's journey and the sovereign's journey. The hero's journey is, like in Star Wars, we see that it's the transition from boyhood into young adulthood. And he's saying there's another journey, which is the sovereign when we reach 40, 50. How do we develop? And it's more of an inward journey. So he talks about that and how we develop this sovereign energy. And he also talks about, connecting to the different parts. So if you've seen some of my other interviews with Rod Boothroyd, this just takes it another level. This is how we actually work with the archetypes. So I found this to be really, really fascinating. If you've had some trauma, maybe it's boarding school syndrome, and you wonder, why should I listen to this episode? It's, for me, at school, I didn't learn about how to be a man. And I feel I learned from other boys. There weren't adults around. So I feel this archetypal work is the blueprint for how we develop into an adult, into those different aspects of, as Jung called it, the depth psychology. So I find this work to be really, really important, especially for ex-boarders or those who've been through some form of trauma growing up. So really enjoy this, and please do leave any comments below. Okay, take care. Okay, welcome to the 56th episode of an Evolving Man podcast. Today I'm speaking to Hugh Newton. Hugh has been working with men for more than 25 years. He works as a coach, runs workshops for men, and is involved in a band of brothers and the Mankind Project. Hugh is also the author of the book, The Sovereign's Journey. Welcome, Hugh.
Thank you. Thanks, Piers. Lovely to be here.
Thank you. Thank you. Yeah, I like to begin the podcast almost by how I know you or how I met you. And I came to do the Mankind Project weekend in 2016, and you were one of the leaders on the weekend.
Right.
I remember you stood above me and next to me, and I'm like, I've not necessarily spoken to you much apart from at Menfest. So I'd love to introduce kind of you sharing a bit of your journey. What drew you into the work you now do?
Sure. Okay, thank you. I grew up in Africa, in what used to be called Rhodesia and is now Zimbabwe. And quite a lot of my childhood, I was involved in the Rhodesian Civil War, and lived a very thoroughly adventurous but extremely dangerous childhood. And I was born there, but my parents were born in England. So my dad decided, when things were getting somewhat dire and there's prospect of having to go into the army, that my dad decided that we were emigrating to England. So we arrived in Wales. And I had severe PTSD, which I then, for many years, did my absolute best to ignore and hide and shove under the covers. And then I eventually, I think when I was 33, I heard about the Mankind Project, and I thought, well, I could have a look at what's going on inside me, because it was causing me a lot of problems. And so I went along there as my first effort to have a look at myself and work to heal some of the trauma that I had inside my system. I lived in dark times as a child and had a lot of worries that I'm dark as a result. Maybe that I'm broken or um, uh, uh, evil, or something's wrong with me, and I'd hidden my past from everyone. So to actually um, reveal myself on the weekend was profound for me. And to still be loved, having revealed what was going on inside me. And it was a huge weight off my back. And I've continued my journey ever since then, a lot of it in Mankind Project, but I've also trained and qualified as a shadow work facilitator. And all of that was part of my journey to bring healing and evolution to myself.
Mm.
And having moved down the line a lot, I feel a need to turn back and support other men who are struggling in the same way I was once struggling, and support other men to wholeness and happiness and abundance and healing. And so that's been my journey, especially over the last few years, where I wish to support men to be happy. And yeah, so I do that in the best way I can.
Well, thank you. And thank you so much for supporting me on my journey. That weekend was very powerful. Really, thank you. Yeah. So I'd love for you to speak a little bit about the importance of men's work. You know, I think it was Robert Bly in Iron John says that the young men need the support of the older men. What's your experience of this? And how do we as older men find the younger men to help? Because I often find, say I'm a scout leader, that sometimes they don't want help on one level. So I'd love you to speak a bit about that.
My feeling is that it's not just younger men who need men's work, it's all men who need men's work. I feel that we need a place to reveal ourselves, a safe place where all of us can show exactly who we are and what's going on inside, and where we can be loved despite that. So I believe that men need a safe place to be able to reveal who they are, and to be able to work on that with support and unconditional love from their brothers. And the groups I've been in, this has been the place where I've done my own healing work, year after year after year, with other men. Whilst I've been supporting them to their healing, they've been supporting me to my healing. I believe for us to evolve, we have to know what's going on inside. And there's lots of different ways in the world, but I know that group work is a vital and profound way for men to do this. And this is the route I've been taken. In the Band of Brothers, we actually recruit young men, because it was formed by a group of us quite some years ago, who knew that these young men are never going to be arriving in Mankind Project or on an NWTA. So we sought to set up an organization where young men could be loved and mentored by older men, and do their internal work to bring themselves to happiness and wholeness. And yes, they are hard to recruit. Young men often don't want to do this. But once they're through the door and they've been on their rite of passage for a weekend, they're usually very dedicated to advancing their own healing. And they're profoundly lucky. The young men ABOB works with are incredibly lucky to be starting this healing work at such a young age. And to be offered a chance to get the grip on themselves and bring themselves into healing and deeper maturity. So it's always an issue getting the young men on board. It's definitely not easy, but long term, young men lean into this work and get a huge amount of support from older men. And yeah, that's what does it really.
Mm, mm, mm. Thank you. Thank you. Yeah, yeah. I think I'm often seeing that now more and more. I remember listening to Robert Moore say, he'd done many years, the author of King, Warrior, Magician, Lover, that he'd done many years of psychotherapy and Jungian analysis, but he found it was the power of doing men's work actually helped him even more.
The thing about men's work is, for me, if the environment's right, there's a lot of expertise and techniques where men can look at important or difficult or huge issues in their lives and adjust or heal or bring those issues to wholeness, really. And to do a piece of work like that can, in one big go, bring about a huge change in a man. And there's something healing about doing it in front of other men. And it's an environment where men can take vast steps forward in themselves. And I think that is why it's so effective. And if men do this work in a group where each man is taking turns, then every man knows each other, knows the other men inside out, and so that healing and that evolution can go together as a group. And so if I see a man working on something inside of himself that he's already worked on, I can remind him and he can take a new step forward rather than traveling over the same old territory.
Mhm.
So yeah, I see group work as amazingly healing and a profound way for men to mature into themselves.
Mm, thank you. I love the word you just used, profound. I do a boarding school men's circle, and one of the participants messaged me afterwards last week, and he said that was profound.
Mm,
Just
mm,
being able to hear other people's stories, it helps them
mm.
to drop in
Yeah.
just that little bit deeper.
That's exactly right. And every man's inner workings, we're all similar in some ways. So seeing other men do their work, I can learn a lot and bring a lot of my own evolution just by being in the room and supporting other men to work as well.
Thank you. So I'd love you to talk a little bit about the sovereign's journey, please. So obviously this is
Mm.
your book, because obviously I've read Hero with a Thousand Faces, this idea of the hero's journey. How do the two differ, please, Hugh?
It seems to me that the hero's journey is our young man's journey, that we take to get ourselves established in the world. We leave home, we quest for adventure, we find ways of undergoing trials, of challenging ourselves, of building our capabilities, of building our ability to do well and to think well of ourselves. I see that as very much the hero's journey. And for a lot of men, that journey has taken place within his career. Most of us commit to a long and hard hero's journey as we find out how we wish to be successful and abundant in the world. And so it's a time of trials and a time of strengthening ourselves and becoming aware of what works and pushing ourselves into the world to bring success to ourselves. Thing is about that is that's not the sovereign's journey. And the difficulty a lot of men have is navigating the end of the hero's journey and the move into the sovereign's journey. Thing about the hero's journey is it's the point of that journey isn't necessarily to be self-aware and to know ourselves inside out. In fact, what can happen on that journey is I push the parts of me that don't contribute to that journey under the carpet and stop them being too troubling. because they're getting on the way of my hard push forward so that I can be successful. And so I tend to push things into shadow which aren't working. And that means I'm not necessarily whole, fulfilled, or happy in my hero's journey. It's much more of a hard quest, trying to find my place in the world and make the most of my place in the world. And for a lot of humans, evolution, there's only really been time for that, because not all that many men lived into old age. And um, so a lot of people kept the main life journey was the hero's journey. I believe that's changed now, and a lot of us men are living past our 50s
Mm.
and moving into a whole new journey that is supposed to take place under the uh, uh, steering and essentially under the leadership of our sovereign. And this is a journey not to strive forward and hide our weaknesses and engage and be successful in the world. This is actually so it's not a strive upwards and out, it's a strive inwards and downwards, back, returning back to our roots, uh, becoming deeply, deeply aware of who we are and doing like an audit of who I am. So uh, the part of me that's totally has the energy to lead this journey is not my warrior anymore, it's my king. And my king's job when I reach 50 is to go, who am I? Like,
Mm.
really, who am I? The king's job is to look back over who I've been so far in my life and to do an audit of all that. The way I do it is through the archetypes. So I encourage men to get to know themselves within each archetype. For instance, if we look at the warrior, what is the healthy warrior? How do I know when I'm in my healthy warrior? How do I know when I'm in a bit in my too much warrior? All I do is work. I'm in danger of burning out. Um, how do I know when my hero's journey is coming to an end and I need to transform myself into something new, into my king's version of me rather than my inherited version of me?
Mm.
So what the king does is he makes a relationship with the many different parts of myself that I've highlighted in my book. And it's his job to make individual relationship with the parts of me so that he strengthens the healthy part. He heals the parts of me that are wounded and in pain. He gets to know the parts of me that are working against my system or not working well for me, and he loves and holds those parts and gives them a home, but also guides and steers them. If I was to use an example of this, I might use the example of the part I call the safety officer.
Mm.
This is a part of us that loves to keep us safe and contained. And this often does this using quite childish strategies that it developed in our childhood, that worked in our childhood, but might not be appropriate for this new part of our journey steered by our king. So my safety officer's response to difficulty or risk might be, okay, stay small, stay contained, don't step out into the open, don't evolve. And so my king will come into close understanding relationship with that part of me, and then that king will return that part of me to its natural job by saying to, for instance, my safety officer, it's great. I love the job you do. Thank you so much. Your job is to look out for risk. And from now on, you report the risks to me, but I make the decisions rather than you making the decisions.
Mhm.
In the absence of a good king, safety officer will have to make the decisions about, do I take the risk or do I just stay small? Once a king's on board, he removes the risk, the decision-making ability from safety officer and says, thank you, be my guide, highlight when you think there's a risk, but from now on, I make the decisions.
Mhm.
Without a good king in place, lots of the king's work and the king's job is made by individual parts. It's the responsibility of our king to go to all those parts and say thank you for all the effort you've done on my behalf. From now on, I make the decisions, and you're welcome. And I love that you serve me, but it's now the king who sits in the central place, and so the king does a good, solid audit of us. So by the end of this process, our king knows us inside out. Our king is very solidly at the center of our being and maintains these relationships with the different parts of us long term and steers us to wholeness, healing, evolution, and to our own choice of who we are rather than the choice we inherited and was socialized into as a child.
That's great. It really puts into perspective what you've mentioned in the book, because I was
Yeah.
wondering that a bit. It's like, because as I've been reading, I'm like, looking at some of the shadows, I'm like, oh my God, I'm that. Oh, I'm definitely that.
Mm.
And that makes sense. I'm hearing the king's almost like the gatekeeper. He kind of, thank you, I will make the decision from here.
He's the gatekeeper from now on. And so, for instance, if I know I have a hefty shadow, um, then once my king has done the piece of work with that past, that party recognizes when that shadow comes up. Once I know myself, inside out, my king will reckon, okay, that's my predator starting to come up.
Mm-hmm.
I'm facing a position of risk and challenge, and my predator starting to come up, and I recognize that. So king turns to predator and says, thank you, predator. Thank you. I see that you believe that you need to protect me in this instance. And we made an arrangement. You don't just steam in anymore. Thank you for letting me go. Stay in my wings. I'll let you know if I need you, and I will look carefully at the situation that you've highlighted.
Mm-hmm.
In the past, with no king, I would have steamed in my predator. My predator would have attacked or found some way of trying to stay safe. And because this part of me happens quick and fast, normally I'd be like, at the end of the process, I'd be like, okay, I've been in my predator. I've been doing these various actions. And now with a king in place, the different parts of me don't leap out and do their old job. They let my king know. And if my king wants them to action, then he'll let them know. Otherwise, they'll sit back down and my king will take it from here.
Mm-hmm.
And even when my king asks a part to step in, for instance, there's one part that's longing for its king, and that is the warrior. Our warriors actually don't work as well as they could unless they have a king who says, "Warrior, this is the plan that I want you to equip." And then the warrior will work away doing what the king wants, with the king always in the background, giving him support and keeping an eye. That way, the warriors are able to go, I know exactly what I need to do. I don't have to search for that. King is supporting me. I can now get on with my job. And it's so important for the king to help the warrior end his long and exhausting hero's journey and move into a new time where he is directed by his king. And then the warrior will be far happier in a much better place. And he'll be able to get on with his job as prescribed by his king, rather than just steaming onwards like warriors tend to when they don't have a good bit of direction.
So thank you. That really gives me a greater understanding through reading your book about the different aspects. I'd love you to talk a little bit about how we develop the king. Is that something which takes time? Are there specific practices we can do? What can we do? Because I guess I come up from this place of, a lot of my work is with ex-boarders or people who've had complex trauma. And I find that for them, it's like, because we were surrounded by boys growing up, we weren't surrounded by men. We kind of grow up mostly in shadow, and we don't really know what the mature forms are. So I'd love you to speak a bit about that.
Yeah, that is the difficulty of the king. I was trying to get my king going for years, and and it wasn't happening. The reason is the king needs to be built. He doesn't just appear fully formed, and it's not like we can go, oh, there's my king, good, he can get on with it now. It doesn't work like that. The king needs to be built. The first way we do that, and the way I work one-on-one and on retreat, is using the outline that I've provided in the book. Men need to go through that and see what qualities they recognize in the king that exist inside themselves. And then they need to do a process to claim their own king. And what that looks like, knowing the possible qualities of the king, is to go into a process and using I statements, say, define their own kingship. I am the generous-hearted, open, loving, connecting king, and I sit at the center of my realm, managing all parts of myself into maturity and into wholeness. So the first step is to proclaim our own king. And then working with men one-on-one, what I then do is I role play their king. There is something so useful for us men to see ourselves from outside ourselves. That's the first step. And so the king has his content, he has his words, he has his statements. What we can then do is, at times of meditation or retreat, we can then, envisaging our king in front of us, we can say these words that belong to our king and bring our body and our being, our kingly being, more into place. Once we have some idea of who our king is and how he works, the rest of the process then involves the king getting in touch with the other parts of myself. So when my king gets to know my safety officer and does a process with my safety officer, there's my safety officer, that's who he is. My king will then stand in front of that part, love and thank my safety officer, and let him know what role he wants safety officer to fulfill from now on going forward. What we'll then do is go back to safety officer and see if he'll agree. And so I work with king and the individual part to get a negotiated agreement between the two parts as to how they function from now on. I write down that agreement and send it to the man I'm working with, so he has a record of the agreement going forwards. Working one-on-one and in retreat, I facilitate the king to come into contact with probably, I think it's about 21 individual parts that exist in all men. Every time our king makes a relationship with a new part and takes responsibility for ensuring that that relationship works in a good way going forwards, we build the body of our king. We build a sense of our kingship. We build a sense of our king being in charge, maturing and encouraging our individual parts. So we end up at the center of our realm with our king in charge, with relationships with the many different parts of ourselves. So that we start to live as both and, rather than just as falling into the individual part. So, for instance, then if I step into warrior and my warrior is doing some task for the king, I am in warrior, but I'm also my king. I
Mm,
can feel my king going forward. So my warrior is never operating anymore entirely on his own. So that in time, all the various parts of myself that my king gets to know, from then on operate with their king, supporting them on an ongoing basis rather than just doing their old habitual stuff. As well as that, we build king by engaging in the other qualities that the king is really good at.
mm, mm,
So being a father first at home,
mm,
being a father and mentor for other men and other people around us in our lives, um, uh, being really careful with what we say. Our king is responsible for what comes out of our mouth as we pronounce our world, consciously being in king when we're doing that, existing and living in our heart,
mm,
which is our heart and soul. Um, uh, King is responsible for bringing our heart and soul out into the world. The biggest power that our king has is the power of our love. And
mm,
it's up to the king to manifest our love out into the world. And the more I'm in touch with my loving center, as pronounced and lived into life by my king, the more solid my king becomes on an ongoing basis. So that more and more of my world that I live in is made up and chosen and brought into being by my king. So that in times my old habitual ways lessen, I move into a world where my king has created my new ways, and I live in my loving heart as my king more and more and more. Is
mm.
that making sense?
Yeah, 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 it is. Just trying to relate it to my own life and my work. And yeah, it really does resonate. I can see that. I think in my life, my warrior took charge
Hmm.
for a
Me
long
too.
time. And then the magician, I think I still have a strong magician. And I think having that king, I think for me, one of the things is having that lover come back in.
Yeah.
These two were just operating, the warrior and the magician. All right, let's
Yeah.
do. Okay,
Yeah.
no, let's think. Do.
Yeah.
Having the lover come in has really helped me to connect to the king more.
That's right. And so the king will meet our lover in process. And for me, the king says to my lover, it's okay. I will keep you safe.
Mm,
Warriors online, he'll keep you safe. King gives my lover permission to feel.
mm,
King shows my lover he's not going to be shamed by feeling, that he is safe to have feelings, that his feelings and his tenderness and vulnerability are welcome in the realm. What happened to me as a child, and particularly in boarding school, is I found myself in an environment where I was deeply, deeply unsafe. The boarding school I went to was in Rhodesia, now Zimbabwe. Um, uh, and teachers kept control of boys with the cane.
mm,
And I suddenly found myself in a place with no parents around me, being in this environment where I was at the mercy of boys all the time. And and it was literally social suicide to show any weakness or any tears, especially when being beaten.
mm,
So I closed my lover off, my ability to cry, to be vulnerable. I absolutely closed it off. And so a lot of the part of trying to recover my lover has been for my king to go back to my lost lover boy, who I shut away when I was in boarding school, and say to that boy, what happened there wasn't right.
mm,
You being told and forced to stop feeling and stop having sadness, stop having vulnerability, that wasn't right. And I totally and utterly love you, my boy. I have a safe space in my heart for you. And I want you to come back to life and to live again, feel your feelings again, feel your vulnerability and your sadness. And in my king, I profoundly hold my boy who got lost when I was in boarding school. And so now, when, for instance, I feel some tears, I have powerful mechanisms that'll cut it off just like that. Now, when I feel that, I turn to my boy and say, remember, you're okay now. You can cry now. You can feel sadness now. You are safe. Come to my heart. Let's feel that sadness together.
Mm.
And so from now on, when I feel that closing mechanism come, I know it's my boy afraid to feel, and because my king knows what's going on in there. And so ongoing, I reassure my boy again and again and again, you can feel you are safe now.
Mm.
You can play and come back to life. I love you. I'll care for you always. You'll never be alone again. And you are not in that cruel world anymore.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you. That kind of brings a memory, and I didn't really piece it together. I went through a breakdown in my 20s living in a Buddhist monastery, and I'd been very suppressed, started to cry, and my mechanism, the whether you call it the predator, I used to self-harm, beat myself. And eventually I got to a point where when I could cry, I could just had this, felt this benevolent presence bigger than me, just holding. It's okay. And now what I'm hearing now is that was my king,
That's your king.
just holding me, and it was lovely
Yeah.
just to go, oh, it's okay, it's okay.
Mm.
That just brought some memories there.
Yeah, and the king is that part. I believe that every part of us is longing for our king to hold us.
Mm.
And when each part, especially our boy, when our boy has the king, it's like, oh, it's okay. It's okay at last. I'm held by the only part in the whole world that can help me like and hold me like that, I believe, is the king. What often happens is we get into a relationship and that lost boy ends up looking for that holding from our partner,
Mm. Mm.
who goes, I don't want this. I don't want to be in relationship with this messed up boy. I want to be in relationship with a king. And so what the king does is he turns the boy round. Here, come this way. Don't look to my partner.
Mm. Mm.
Don't look to my partner. Look to me. I will love you always. And then that removes that desperate boy trying to get love from our partner, takes him home so we can be in our relationship in a healthy lover and a healthy king, rather than a desperate boy searching for love.
Mm. Thank you. It's interesting. I've heard this often by women contacting me who've married to ex-boarders saying they blow hot and cold, they're really needy, and then they're like, oh, and I'm almost hearing that play out with that analogy of their needing something from their partner, but it's not safe to. So what you're saying is actually no, get it from the king, from
It's,
yourself.
and it's not the partner's responsibility to rescue that boy. It's the king's responsibility. And the relationship will never be whole until the man's king takes the boy home. Says to him, I understand why you run. I understand why you blow hot and cold. And then when we're in a relationship and we feel that desperate, take me, help me, or we feel, I've got to get out of here, I'm not safe here. Both times we turn to the boy. King brings him in. I love you. You're okay. You're okay. You don't have to manage this relationship. Come in here. And the king manages the relationship whilst keeping his boy safe. So that really painful dynamic, hot, cold, doesn't need to happen anymore,
Mm-hmm.
because the part that is running that dynamic is held in by the king.
Mm. Thank you. That's very profound. Yeah, thank you, Hugh. So I think something you've spoken about, we've got about 10 minutes left,
Mm.
is a bit about the collective unconscious, but also the shadow. what is the importance of understanding both our shadows, but also the collective shadow?
It's ultra important, because if I don't know who I am, if I don't fully know who I am, I can't be whole. And my king can't manage me. The only parts of myself the king can manage are the parts he knows. It's the king's job to find out what's in my shadow so he can manage all of me. Otherwise, if a part's in shadow, I don't own it. I say that's not truly me, and that part of me runs around and gets me to behave in certain ways that I don't understand or I can't fully relate to, and yet they're still me. They're just the shadowy parts of me.
Mm.
So there's two levels of unconscious. The first, for me, is my personal unconscious, the parts of me that I have forgotten about or put into shadow deliberately, and they've just become habitual and they below my consciousness. Beyond that is the collective unconscious. It's the unconscious that we all have in common for being human, inherited from human beings who've operated in these common ways since the beginning of time. And they're our collective unconscious is an incredibly fruitful place for our king to dive into and learn more and more about us, because we all have it in common. So he has a double-edged job. First is to get to know all the bits of myself I've hidden, and then to dive further into that to find out what makes me human, what makes me human in common with you, and what are our common characteristics that we all run. And it's all in there in our collective conscious. We're lucky we've got this beautiful life journey to unearth that and find our creativity and our unity, our generosity, how we relate to each other. It's all in, and it's all inside us. And it's the king's job to navigate all of that so we know ourselves so much better.
Mm. Mm. Thank you. Yeah, the shadow. Yeah, because I notice in myself, it's like the shadow, it's often when I'm tired, not feeling that well, or a bit stressed, it seems that those parts kind of rear their heads. And over the years, I've learned to bring more consciousness to them. But yeah, I can really resonate with
Yeah, and it gets worse as we get old.
that. Yeah.
It gets worse because we run out of testosterone and we run out of strength in some ways, and parts of our shadow which we managed and spend a lot of time trying to keep down and hidden, we have less strength to do that, so they pop out more often. They get out more often, and the only way is for the king to know them inside out and get a negotiated agreement where they go, okay, well, for instance, around self-critic, he gets stronger and stronger and stronger. And it's up to the king to get to know this part inside out and make an agreement which goes, self-critic, I love you. I know why you've been criticizing me, and I need your agreement that stops. You never criticize anymore. You take up your rightful job as the radar, surveying out for danger, but you never criticize us inside the system anymore. And it's the king's job to do bits of work like that free us up to be ourselves, and that also take in hand the parts of us that are not working.
Mm-hmm. Would you be able to speak a bit, the last few minutes we've got, just about dissociation a bit? I often find that there's certain people I work with, and ex-boarders, we've learned to dissociate rather massively, especially if we've been at school, say, for 10 years. What do you find, has helped you in your work around dissociation?
Yeah, you have to find the part that's organizing the dissociation. The part of us that is organizing our dissociation is safety officer. What the safety officer does is goes, this looks like it's going to be risky or dangerous or painful. I'm going to get us out of here. He has a lot of strategies to keep us safe. Dissociation, clouding our mind so we can't think, so we're not really present, making us be a chameleon so people like us, making us be a people pleaser, um, helping us to fawn on people who seem to be dangerous. All of these are strategies by safety officer to get us small and safe, not in the place of danger. So hopefully it goes off over our head and we survive. They're survival strategies by safety officer. So what needs to be done is the king needs to get into a relationship with safety officer who's dissociating us, and make an agreement with that part that, look, the king is here. I will keep us safe now. Safety officer, you do not dissociate us anymore. You let me know if you think there's a risk. Stop deciding to take those actions.
Mm.
And so across the board, our king will negotiate with that part of us, safety officer, who gets us to do various things he did when we were boys. If I dissociate when I'm a boy, I can stay safe because I won't feel it if someone's bullying me. I won't feel what's going on. I can be safe hidden inside here. When that's no longer necessary, king gets into touch with the part safety officer who's dissociating us and arranges to keep us safe. The reason safety officer needs that is because the king says, I will keep us safe. Safety officer, that your job is done around that. Just be my radar, point out where there's difficulty, and then I make the decision as to what's next. What's next, you don't dissociate me anymore.
Mm.
That relationship takes some bedding in because it's old, habitual, and strong. But with a good king in place, with his eye, who notices, once we've done that piece of work, we have seconds to notice, it's safety officer about to dissociate me. Safety officer, thank you. Remember, we're not doing that now, and he can stop it.
Mm, mm, Okay, yeah, thank you. That's really insightful. Yeah, because I often come across dissociation and I have my methods, but sometimes they don't necessarily work as well. So it's
Yeah.
like, what other things can we do? So that's really useful.
And that's the beauty of these archetypes. Everything that happens to us is being run by a part. It doesn't just happen.
Mm,
Everything we do is being decided and run by a part of us habitually. So we go in, find that part. Kings makes a relationship with that part, and he puts a stop to things that are happening inside us that he doesn't want to happen.
Thank you. Thank you. Yeah. So we've got a couple of minutes left. I'd love for you just to share a little bit about how people learn more about how you work, and where can people reach out to you?
Mm. Yes, I run on-the-ground retreats for groups of men who wish to do this work together. First retreat, we build it's the king's initiation. We build the king and get him on his throne, and get him anchored in himself. On the second retreat, we unite the king with the amazing amount of support he has. First from spirit, unite him with his spirit and with spiritual forces, unite him with his soul, living in his heart, all the times that he's lived in the past and maybe in previous incarnations, and we unite him back up with nature, with his natural essence. Help him to tie up with his ancestors, with his animal supporters. We get him so fully in place with an incredible amount of support, backup, and holding. So our king is held within our greater system. So he's not doing all the holding, he is holding with tremendous amount of support. And once we have that in place, he can then go ahead and do his work with the many archetypal parts of himself to bring himself up to date. If men want to do that work one-on-one, then they just email me and we have an initial chat, and then they go into a program of work, working one-on-one. I particularly specialize in trauma, and in darkness, masculine darkness, in midlife transition, ending the cycle of endless warrior hero's journey, and moving into our sovereign's journey and taking up our latter part of life. So either one-to-one or in group work, I work either way.
And your best website is The Sovereign's Journey? Is that right?
thesovereignsjourney.com, yeah. Or my email is hpnewton@hotmail.co.uk.
hotmail.co.uk.
And I work with a lot of people who've been in trauma, but I also work with a lot of people who had difficulties going off to boarding school, because, as you say, the greatest difficulty we've got is closing off our lover, so closing off our feelings, plus probably PTSD, plus a lot of strategies to try and stay safe in an unsafe world. And all of that can be worked through. We don't have to suffer under that very early warning, very early wounding. We can work it all through. So our king leads us forward rather than our lost and pained younger parts.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you so much for today. I'm coming to time, and yeah, really appreciate you speaking, and I feel I've got a lot more depth of understanding about accessing the archetypes, and so I really recommend people do read Hugh's book. Find that fascinating, and yeah, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you, Piers. Lots of love. Lovely to see you here, and I look forward to seeing you again.
Great. Thanks, you.
Take care. Bye, hey.